My name is Emma Hopkins, and this is my senior research capstone in the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies Department at the University of Kansas. Gender Under Lockdown, COVID-19, Isolation, and Gender Identity. My instructor is Stacy Vanderhurst. The first few months of 2020 were a whirlwind, from the first cases of COVID-19 being detected to stay-at-home orders being implemented across the globe. People's lives changed significantly. The things that they were previously doing in the presence of other people in public, they were now doing from their home. With that being said, my own lived experience inspires this research. As a college student who was working retail at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, my classes were moved online and the place I was working closed. This left me confined to my apartment with 3 roommates, and I wasn't feeling the need to present in a lot of the traditionally feminine ways that I did before. I was shaving a lot less, wearing baggier clothes, and I even shaved my eyebrows. This newfound freedom of expression, along with the time and the assignments that I had for my major, caused me to read more and expanded my arsenal of language that I could use to describe my experience. I was also surrounded by a supportive network of people who were able to accept the pronouns I wanted to use, and I found myself uncomfortable with the way that people were gendering me when I returned to work. I discussed these experiences with my friends and my support network, and a lot of people experienced a similar thing as me, which inspired my research. This project contributes to a whole field of existing research surrounding gender identity, how it's constructed, enforced, and lived. Queer theorists have long been advancing theories about gender as a social institution, and my research will work to further complement these theories and demonstrate how, when removed from social institutions that police them, people can experience a degree of liberation from gender norms. For some background and context, I read Where the Millennials Will Take Us, A New Generation Wrestles with the Gender Structure by Barbara J. Risman. This book shows the shifting attitudes of the younger generations as it concerns gender identity and presentation. The book expands on how some young people are rejecting the institution of the gender binary in their everyday lives by living as gender nonconforming. It provides the basis for my research to assert that younger people already hold a degree of skepticism towards gender and know it's a social construct, leading many of them to resist it. The research in this book reflects the method of my choosing as well. A lot of it is made up of conversations that research participants had with the researcher about their gender identity. The research participants' answers are what guides the interview process and the next steps, and although my interviews are much shorter, I believe that the alignment of my method with this book will help me represent people's experiences in a clear way. My research is also inspired by the theories of Judith Butler. Their 1990 book, Gender Trouble, discusses gender performativity and the cultural construction of gender. It provides basis for my research because it discusses the forces that be which form people's perception of themselves. And these very forces are what are affected most by the COVID-19 pandemic. It also discusses doing gender, which is a large aspect of my research. My project contributes to this research in an important way because we are in a historical moment which is unprecedented, and it needs to be analyzed in relation to gender construction because gender is fluid and changes with social context. So documenting it as it happens is important so that these moments don't get lost in history. So I'm linking Risman's work along with the actual effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and then the things that my research participants had to say. So Risman's quote, "The presumptions that males should dress and behave as men and females as women pervades the world of work as well as school and clothing stores." This speaks to the fact that gender pervades every aspect of life. And the next area of this slide, COVID-19, shows that all of the aspects of life which are discussed in this Risman quote are what was affected most. So people were distant from these quote-unquote worlds that Risman mentioned, therefore being distant from the presumptions that are attached to these worlds, and therefore not feeling the need to perform for these worlds in the same way that they did before. My interviewee, Finn, says that their definition of gender gained nuance with age. It also gained nuance with having some quiet time to themselves, kind of separate from the gendered institution of school. So this speaks to Risman's research as well as Butler's theory that these gendered institutions really do form the way that people see themselves. And when people are given space from these institutions, they feel more freedom to explore their true identity. So, with that being said, we go into my methods. My methods mainly consist of semi-structured interviews with about 7 participants, and these interviews were modeled after methods discussed in Feminist Research Practice, a primer edited by Charlene Nagy Hesse-Biber. I chose this method because it reflects the method of past feminist researchers, which is focused on respecting the boundaries of and centering the experiences of participants. The interview method allows the answers of participants to guide my next question and steps, and the interview method allows for participants to feel a degree of comfort as it's slightly more casual and allows them to discuss what they deem is most important to their experience. I do this in conjunction with a content analysis of Risman's book and other queer theory to support the experiences of people. I also gave my participants the option to submit work for a zine because zines have long been a form of expression for feminists and queer folks, and I've chosen to include the art of participants if they wish in order to convey their experiences with identity and isolation visually in ways that they may not be able to articulate verbally. I feel that it aids in storytelling of their experiences as well as creating a small archive of sorts of the historical moment of the COVID-19 pandemic. Moving on to my key data, I have 3 main themes, the first of which being the power of perception. Many of the participants describe feeling pressure from the ways other people perceive them and the places where they exist in their everyday lives. Another one of the pressures that participants describe is the male gaze, which is also something that became less prevalent during the pandemic. And I've included a quote on the slide from one of the participants, Meadows, who says that they felt this pressure of the way people were perceiving them until the pandemic, when they realized a big part of it being understanding their true selves and accepting their true selves, was losing that idea of perception, or the idea that perception matters. And the second main theme was people feeling the need to do gender in a right way, quote unquote. So whether this was doing gender in a right way where people wanted them to be feminine or masculine in a certain way, that also felt that people wanted them to be queer in a certain way. So even when they felt comfortable in their own queerness, some people thought that if they didn't look androgynous enough, and if they were still presenting feminine, then there's no way you could be non-binary, when that's just not the case for a lot of my participants, and a lot of Risman's participants as well, who believe that their expression is not linked to their identity. It's just an extension of how they are feeling. And Elise touches on this in their quote, or in her quote, "I don't need to look queer to know that I'm doing queer things." And I feel like this is something that rings true for a lot of the participants and a lot of people's lived experience. The third main theme being that isolation is an opportunity to understand or know oneself. People were able to explore their physical embodiment as well as their sexual identity in the pandemic. And Elisa's quote refers to how online social interactions contributed to her realizations about gender and how she would have not been given the opportunity to try them if it weren't for lockdown. Others were given the opportunity to learn new language and quote-unquote try it on, as Meadows describes, to see how it resonated with their lived experience. And the ability to do these things were directly correlated to mandated alone time from the pandemic. So the contribution and new insight that this research provides is insight on a new experience and the experience of a generation that has unprecedented views on gender in an unprecedented time. So my research provides new perspectives on the foundation of queer theory by demonstrating how distance from social pressure can lead to an acceptance of one's own gender fluidity or nonconformity. I've included a small quote from Meadows which illustrates the ways in which simply being around others can act as a limiting force on one's authenticity, in which they say, that they were no longer having to perform. They were just allowing authenticity to take over. So, in conclusion, there are larger scale implications that can be drawn from my work, which is that when the pressure of the societal gaze is less prevalent and when people are surrounded by a supportive network, they can further embrace or understand their true gender identity. There are a lot of scrutinous conditions in society, and people are more able to embrace aspects of their identity which are deemed by society as non-normative when they are able to spend time alone, and when they are given the tools, language, and support that they need to feel confident to do so. The future of this work, if given the opportunity, in a world where people are pushing for things to go back to normal, would look like this research being used to improve social institutions in which people exist, such as school and work, so they no longer feel pressured to perform in a gendered certain way. We as a society can allow for this kind of self-expression and exploration in all settings, not just isolation, and create supportive environments in all circles so people can comfortably exist outside of the binary. I would like to acknowledge Stacy Vanderhurst and Abigail Barefoot, my instructors, for all of their help with this project, as well as my research participants for taking the time to participate in interviews and submit their amazing art. I would also like to thank the Emily Taylor Center and everyone else who shared my call for participants and helped me find people who are willing to participate in this research and who have similar experiences.